Hello, friends. Welcome back. It is your man, the Cozy Representative, back here again with another video. And that's right, today we're going to be ranking all of Taking Back Sunday's full-length records from worst to best in my humblest of opinions.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello! Yo, so how's everybody doing? Good, huh? What's up? That was weak, mad weak. That was about a 5. We're gonna try to bring it up to 10. I hope that's okay. Before I say anything else, this is a big factor in my life. Over anything else, over family, over band, is friends. Luke Kavanaugh, Nolan, Scott. Honestly, I don't know if you guys saw the Last Chance Diaries. They were the first band to play. Amazing. But look, friends is what makes you. Friends is also what can break you. Friends is the only thing that will keep you breathing. Understand that, know that, learn that, please. We're Taking Back Sunday from motherfucking Long Island, New York.
Now, I'm not gonna spend time on a whole big intro explaining the history of Taking Back Sunday's career because, for one thing, as most of you may know, it's very long and winding. They've had a lot of member changes throughout the years, a lot of different eras. It's a very confusing, like, non-linear history. And for the sake of brevity right now, I'm just going to get into my ranking. And another reason for that is I am planning on making more videos about the history of Taking Back Sunday in the future and get more in-depth in covering specific eras of the band and their history, you know what I mean? Because they are one of my favorite bands of all time, in case anybody didn't know that about me. And that being said, considering they are one of my favorite bands of all time, it was pretty difficult for me to come up with this list, and more specifically come up with what album would be last on the list, because, you know, we're doing it worst to best. But, you know, I thought about it. I put a lot of time into thinking about it, racking my brain, what in my opinion would be last on this list. And the more I thought about it, the more the answer became deafeningly clear to me. Yup, that's right, 2016's Tidal Wave, which came out on indie label Hopeless Records in 2016. It was produced by Mike Sapone, who's a legendary Long Island-based producer who actually recorded Taking Back Sunday's demos for the Tell Your Friends album all the way back in 2001, which is pretty cool. This album, Tidal Wave, is actually the most recently released Taking Back Sunday album, despite it being 5 years old now. I believe their celebratory year-long 20-year anniversary of Taking Back Sunday tour in 2019, immediately followed by the, global pandemic, has had something to do with the delay in albums. But anyways, yeah, Tidal Wave. This is my least favorite one.
The reason we're playing this new song is because it's just that damn good, and I want you to hear it. It's called Tidal Wave.
So I guess I'll start off with the positives I have about it. There really are like a handful of specific songs on this thing that I think are really good, well-written, well-done songs. For example, the opening track, Death Wolf, is probably my favorite song on the whole album. It's rockin', it's like the perfect lively introduction to set the tone for the whole rest of the album. To me, it's very reminiscent of the band's straightforward, powerful rock sound, which they honed in on back on 2006's Louder Now, which is very cool. Right off the bat, when you put this song on, Death Wolf, you know, to me, at first, you're like, yeah, this rips, man. This is anthemic, powerful. It sounds like Taking Back Sunday doing what Taking Back Sunday does best. And it makes you think that the rest of the album is gonna be that rippin' too. Some other songs I like, You Can't Look Back, which I think is the lead single on this album, is a cool kind of Americana sounding song, which I like, a Tom Petty vibe in there. Fences has a cool chorus and a nice wholesome sort of alt country vibe. Call Come Running is a standout song. Holy Water's not bad. You know, there's some good tracks on here. However, there's a couple big cons about this album that are my reasons for it coming in last place on this list. For one thing, this album is by far, without a doubt, the most dad rock sounding music that Taking Back Sunday has ever made. They're pretty much making straight up old man, like bar band music on this album. It feels like I'm at the Irish pub on a Sunday afternoon watching a bunch of 55-year-olds cover Leonard Skinner or something. The overall vibe is almost kind of like, to me, if you took a classic, you know, earlier Taking Back Sunday album, like maybe Louder Now, like I was saying, and put it in a blender with, like, I don't know, Tom Petty's Full Moon Fever, and maybe some other swanky 70s rock dinosaur bands in there too, maybe some Steely Dan or something, or some like The Clash / Against Me influence on the title track, Tidal Wave, which honestly, you know, sounds really, really cool on paper, but in practice, it culminates in an album that feels very out of place and kind of directionless. Not only do I think that they didn't hit the nail on the head in terms of what exactly they were going for on this album, I also really just can't tell what exactly it is that they were going for in general. Like, who is this album for exactly? Adam does this like weird sheep thing with his vocals throughout this whole album, which really just sounds pretty bad to me. He also does this live all the time these days, and it just doesn't sound good to me, you know? It's super grating, and he didn't used to do this either, the sheep thing. It's like a post-2012 Adam thing, and I really, on as much, I love Adam Lazzara, but I can't stand this thing he does with his vocals.
We face down across your floor. Just so long, this thing's loaded.
Overall, he like tries to do this like country boy accent, this like southern preacher man kind of thing that he's trying to go for, and honestly, to me, it's way more cringy than it is endearing.
But we are here, not on a normal tour. You see, anytime that we're able to come here, well, that's a reason for us to celebrate. But what we wanted to do and what we're doing this year, we figured we'd take a break from the hustle and the bustle and the hustle and the, well, you know, the bustle and the bustle. Nobody ever speaks much about the bustle. No, but you gotta remember, Jay-Z, Sean Carter sang a lot about the hustle, which is not to be knocked, by the way, thinking, but didn't talk much about the bustle. Here's what we're gonna do. We're only here for one night, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna play the record that kicked all of this off and changed our lives forever. Irrevocably. Alright, so this motherfucker stands up. So that's all on you. The whole crowd's looking at you. You better stay seated. You see what I can do with this, right? You see a lot of pretty boys trying to do this, right? Nobody does it like Daddy does.
Aside from that, like I was saying earlier, this album really isn't bad per se musically. You know, Taking Back Sunday are great musicians, but overall it's just pretty unremarkable if you ask me. It doesn't really grab your attention all that much besides like, that's pretty cool, I guess, type reaction. And in my opinion, it's very hard to listen to this album all the way through. I usually lose interest around track 6, I Felt It Too, which is a 5-minute long snooze fest, which I can never make it past. I don't know why it's right in the middle of the album. I just lose interest right there. And to me, it's really just nothing to write home about as a whole. Oh well, it could be worse, you know. I'm almost starting to think of Taking Back Sunday as an entity in general, as starting to be similar to bands like, I don't know, the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones or like the Bouncing Souls, you know, like a classic dad punk sort of bands. They've been around forever. They've got their classic records. They've got their dedicated older fan base. They come around and play House of Blues once a year with like Kevin Devine opening or something. I just hope that the next Taking Back Sunday album is a little bit more focused and attention grabbing, a little bit less of the old man music kind of vibe. Hopefully the 5-year gap between albums reinvigorates them and puts a new life into the band. That's what I'm hoping. I got my fingers crossed. Anyways, that's Tidal Wave. Sorry, Tidal Wave. That's just how I feel. Let's move on to my next pick.
So if you're interested, I'll take you anywhere.
Oh yes, 2014's Happiness Is, their second release featuring the reunited classic Tell All Your Friends lineup, the mythical Tell All Your Friends lineup, and this album, for what it's worth, is a pretty strong album. I definitely think it's better than Tidal Wave. It has a lot of things which Tidal Wave lacks for me. It's somewhat attention-grabbing, it's a lot more cohesive, it's a lot more focused, it's a fun, relatively entertaining listen all the way through. It sounds like a band who is a lot more sure of themselves and comfortable with who they are. It's like definitely slightly veering into old man dad rock bar band music territory, but it's not completely there. It's way farther from that than Tidal Wave is. I feel like this album has a little bit more of a Stray Light Run, John and Sean's old band kind of vibe, with a hearty dose of, again, maybe Taking Back Sunday's Louder Now album, with like a fresh coat of Tom Petty-esque Americana rock and roll paint on it. It's actually a pretty good album. You know, there's some great songs on here, I can't lie. Adam really sounds like he was stepping up his game vocally on this album and taking his vocals seriously. You know, he can get kind of lazy sometimes these days with his vocal performances, both live and on record sometimes, so it's really meaningful, you know, as a fan to hear him step up to the plate and deliver some of those classic Adam Lazzara high belts, like for example at the end of Flicker Fade, or throughout the very rockin' Louder Now-esque track They Don't Have Any Friends. Flicker Fade, which was the lead single off the album, a standout track, very immediate, very big, very attention-grabbing. This song was probably the biggest and also the most well-received single the band had released since Make Damn Sure, actually, back in 2006. Beat Up Car is a standout song for me. I think they really hit a certain sweet spot on this one, and this song, I would say, Beat Up Car, is a good example of Taking Back Sunday aging like a fine wine. Like You Do is a great song. Once again, it has a very Tom Petty-esque Americana vibe, which is a lot more well executed on this song than when they tried to half-heartedly tackle the Americana vibe again on Tidal Wave. They did a great job on the song, Like You Do. I really like this one a lot. It sounds very natural and perfect for like driving down the highway on a hot summer day, you know? We Were Younger Then is another song that I personally enjoy a lot. This one's pretty old man Americana dad rock, but it still has the edge and the conviction that a band like Taking Back Sunday is known for bringing to the table, and I also think they hit a really nice sweet spot on this song too. The rest of the tracks are all good, you know, honorable mentions at the very least. All in all, it's a pretty decent album. When you're like specifically in the mood for this album, it totally does rip. It has character, there's more standout memorable moments. However, at the end of the day, the problem that I have with this album is the same problem that I have with all of the Taking Back Sunday albums, which have come out of the reunited John and Sean classic Tell Your Friends era lineup since, 2010 or 2011 or so. There's just something that isn't quite right about it. It doesn't hit that sweet spot and give me that warm feeling like their old records do, and it always leaves me feeling kind of confused after I'm done listening to it. I'm like, I listen to it and I'm like, I'm not even really sure if I liked that or not, you know what I mean? And I can't quite put my finger on it, and it's not as simple as just, I like their older stuff better. Like, I really genuinely want to love these more recent TBS albums, and theoretically I should. It's the band, doing what they do. But sometimes when I start thinking too hard about the newer TBS albums and the reunited John and Sean lineup of the band as a whole, it almost seems like this big glitch in the simulation. Do you know what I mean? It's like an experiment gone weird. It's not bad, but there's just something kind of off about it, which prevents me from being able to personally connect with Happiness Is, or have me come back to it all that often. And I've thought about this a lot, not only in preparation for this video, but over the years, and I've come to the conclusion that I think it has a lot to do with the fact that, obviously, John and Sean left the band for like 7 years after Tell Your Friends came out, before coming back around 2010, and with all of the lineup changes, not only in that lineup change, but also in the time that they were out of the band, there were lineup changes there too. It's almost like Taking Back Sunday didn't really get the chance to evolve in a natural, linear way like most bands do. So all of the reunited Tell Your Friends lineup, Taking Back Sunday albums from the last 10 years, all just honestly feel confusing and out of place to me. That being said, I do think Happiness Is a really good album title, though. The band also really killed it with the artwork and the overall aesthetic and creative direction behind this album as a whole. So, there's pros and cons. And if I had to sum this album up in one succinct phrase, I would say it's glitch in the simulation, old man Americana emo core. You know what I'm saying? And that's Happiness Is. And with that, onwards to my next pick. Yup, that's right, friends. Taking Back Sunday's 2011 self-titled record is up next on my list. Now, if you haven't noticed, there seems to be a bit of an interesting pattern going on here. Every album that I've listed so far goes in the exact reverse chronological order of when they came out, which basically means that, I don't think this is a band who are necessarily getting better with every record. Which is sad to say because they're so legendary, and like I was saying earlier, they're one of my favorite bands of all time. But also, come on, how many bands actually do get better with every record? There are bands who do, but that's few and far between. That's a hard thing to accomplish, especially when your first 3 records are as influential and important and groundbreaking, timeless classics at this point, like Taking Back Sunday's earlier albums are, I'm not that into Led Zeppelin, but if I was your dad, I'd be like, that's like trying to follow up Led Zeppelin 4. I can cut Taking Back Sunday some slack. Like I was saying, they've had a weird career, lots of strange lineup changes. It's amazing that they're even still a band in general, period, at this point. Good on them for that, Anyway, 2011's self-titled record, Taking Back Sunday, the first album back with their reunited classic Tell All Your Friends lineup, John Nolan and Sean Cooper, the GOATs in the cut. those guys back in the band for the first time in 7 years. It was a very, very exciting time in the history of Taking Back Sunday. People were stoked, and this album was highly anticipated amongst fans.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my proud pleasure to be here in front of you this evening. I speak for the five of us. We are Taking Back Sunday.
But when this album came out, I remember it. I bought it when it came out. Although it was highly anticipated and everyone was stoked, for whatever reason, the initial impact that this album made was more of a small thud as opposed to a big bang. And I think that there are two reasons for this. For one thing, this was 2011. I don't know if y'all remember, but this was like maybe 4 or 5 years before the so-called emo revival really started coming into play. Not the Machine Gun Kelly thing. That's not the emo revival. You know what people who know what I'm talking about know what I'm talking about. I'm talking like when, you know, emo night started happening and people kind of started, you know, revisiting the classic emo albums of their youth in a new light, and it kind of came cool again to, you know, be into like emo stuff or whatever. You guys know what I'm saying. Because, you know, to put it bluntly, around 2011 or 2012 or so, at least in the grand scheme of things, in the grand scheme of the culture at the time, any music even remotely like Warped Tour emo related just didn't really seem that cool or that relevant at that time. It was a dip in popularity for all of those bands as a whole, as the once young, you know, Warped Tour obsessed fan base who were teenagers in the 2000s were now entering their college age and had moved on to more mature music like Modest Mouse or like Bombay Bicycle Club or some shit. And the current young Warped Tour fans at the time were listening to all of the newer metalcore, which was dominating at the time, like Of Mice and Men or Asking Alexandria or that kind of thing. Older bands like Taking Back Sunday or Say Anything or Motion City Soundtrack were all experiencing somewhat of a dip. The other big aspect is that the simple fact that I think most people were expecting an album that was going to sound musically similar to Tell All Your Friends and shared more of a similar raw, emo, like punk rock sort of vibe like Tell All Your Friends, and the self-titled record is not that. It really doesn't share much in common with Tell All Your Friends. It's a lot more mature and grown up. It wasn't quite old man dad rock music yet, but it was definitely maybe a little more mature and different than fans maybe expected or wanted. It didn't exactly hit as hard as their older records and was kind of more of a new beginning for a band as opposed to a callback to the past. This album was definitely a bit hindered by, you know, them sort of getting used to writing together again after 7 years away from each other, you know, and finding their groove again. You can tell there's a little bit of growing pains. They're still getting used to playing together and writing together again. But I have to say, although this album did feel kind of weird when it first came out, I think now, 10 years later, looking back, I think this album aged super well and actually sounds a lot better now than I remember it sounding at the time for some reason. Like I said earlier, it's like whenever I go back to this album, I'm like, fuck, this is actually super rippin'. Why don't more people talk about this album? Why wasn't this album bigger, you know? El Paso, for example, is an amazing, amazing opening track. One of their most underrated songs ever. One of their heaviest songs ever. And is actually my second favorite Taking Back Sunday album opener, right behind What's It Feel Like to Be a Ghost. It doesn't feel like falling. You got me. Me and Who Are You Anyways show the band really firing off at all cylinders and delivering music that really did feel like a matured Taking Back Sunday, hitting the sweet spots in all the right ways. Sad Savior and This Is All Now and Best Places to Be a Mom are all super strong. The production sounds great. The band, has plenty of driving energy on this album, which Taking Back Sunday have always been most known for. Adam's voice sounds good on this album. He wasn't really quite doing his sheep-like old man country southern accent thing yet. He was just starting to do that, but it wasn't like overt. Hearing John Nolan's voice back on a TBS album was and is very cool. Call Me in the Morning is one of their best closing tracks. It's a very powerful one. I remember thinking the lead single off this album, Faith When I Let You Down, was kind of corny back when this album first came out. Maybe it's because I was a lot younger then, but it's a kind of a tame mid-tempo, like wholesome rock track. Lyrically, it's about how if you happen to lose faith in meaningful things like musical or freedom or money, you shouldn't lose your faith in Adam Lazzara. That was a joke. I'm just kidding. I know the song's not really about that. It's more, the lyrics are more metaphorical. But that's what I always think whenever I listen to these lyrics. I'm like, yeah, I shouldn't lose my faith in Adam Lazzara, should I? Everything's going wrong, but I just need to hold on to Adam Lazzara and TBS. Anyways, now that I'm older, I actually love the message of this song, Faith, and the hopefulness and warmth that it brings. Like most of the album, this song has just aged well to me and sounds a lot better 10 years later than it did at the time. I can't really say the same for Happiness Is or Tidal Wave, and unlike those albums, I really do think that the self-titled is super strong and super underrated. I think it should get more recognition, and to me, all in all, it's just a pretty damn underrated Taking Back Sunday record. Now, are you guys ready for a hot take? Are you ready for me to deliver a hot take to you? And this is the point where I'm almost like, let's tread lightly here. Don't just click off the video after I tell you what album's coming next. Please bear with me on this one. Let's go. Here's my next pick.
I want everyone to give it up for friend Roy, Brian, and all the peacekeepers here because they keep us They are on mission. We are taking back Sunday from New York. I hope you guys enjoy it.
Oh, that's right! Read it and weep, friends! The bona fide emo classic, legendary 2002 debut record from Taking Back Sunday, Tell All Your Friends, at this point in my life is ranked fairly lower than I feel like most people would rank this one. You probably thought this was gonna come in at like first place, didn't you? Or second or third place at the very least, right? Nope, sorry. Once again, read it and weep. It's just how I feel. Now, I do have to clarify, I love love this record, Tell All Your Friends. I mean, who doesn't, right? It's obviously a freaking classic in the scene. Pretty much every emo, pop punk, post-hardcore band who came out after 2002 was undoubtedly highly inspired by this record. This record will forever be on every list of, 2000s emo classics, and rightfully so. The sheer impact that this record made on the emo scene, as well as on the greater music scene as a whole, absolutely cannot be denied or questioned. And this record is personally very meaningful to me, too. It was literally like my actual musical Bible when I was like in early high school. Nothing could beat it. I've probably cried to this album more times than any other album that I've ever heard. It will, forever be attached to all of my 14-year-old crushes and heartbreaks. It's a meaningful one, and I think most of you watching probably definitely have a very similar relationship, meaningful relationship with Tell All Your Friends. Musically, this album is immensely raw and intense. It's a little sloppy and rough around the edges, but in a really genuine, like, punk rock kind of way, and it really worked really well in terms of emphasizing the over-the-top, emotional, intense, dramatic nature of the music and the lyrics. If you had asked me when I was in high school, not only would I have told you that Tell All Your Friends was my favorite Taking Back Sunday record, but I would have looked you in the eye and told you that I thought that this was one of the greatest albums of all time. But a lot of what this album once meant to me has also stayed in high school. You know what I mean? You know what I'm getting at? For example, one of the most important and compelling things about this album to me when I was in high school was the lyrical content. Over-the-top emotional lyrics about being absolutely devastated about girls, just heart-wrenchingly devastated about, girls that you had crushes on, or whoever you had crushes on. It's no wonder that this album made such an impact, on hundreds of thousands of young emo kids. It's really the perfect album for having a devastating teenage crush on an unrequited love, or going through your first breakup, which we all know is so painful. This album paints those emotions and scenarios perfectly. But, now, I'm 24 now, I'll be 25 in a few months. I've had a little bit more life experience under my belt. I've grown. I have more empathy now, I'd like to think. I'm a lot less impulsive and dramatic and overreactive to small situations, just as a human being in my personal life. And honestly, I no longer relate to lyrics like, if I'm just bad news, then you're a liar, or she'll destroy us all before she's through and find a way to blame somebody else. There's a ton of think piece articles on medium.com or whatever about how the lyrics on albums like Tell All Your Friends or Take This to Your Grave are actually super misogynistic and are basically like a how-to guide on manipulating and gaslighting your ex. And most of us listeners didn't even realize that aspect of this music when we were teenagers in the 2000s. None of us were quite learned, you know what I'm saying. And like I said, I still love this record. I still think that these songs are amazing and intense, and I have so much love and respect for this album in general and what it meant to everybody and represented, and what a special moment in time that the Tell All Your Friends era of this band was. It was really special.
Real quick, we're gonna take this time to introduce everybody into Taking Back Sunday. Ladies and gentlemen, right behind me we have Mark Sticks O'Connell. Let's hear it. All right. To my immediate right, we have Shawnee Fingers Cooper. Okay. Now to my far right, we have, do I look good in this sweater? Eddie Radio. Better known to his closest friends as Little Santana, that likes food more. To my very far left, we have our merch guy, Floyd. Let's hear it. Right here on the gentlemen, directly behind me, the beautiful, the one, the only, Michelle Nolan. Let's hear it for her. Come on. My name's Adam. Welcome to the eighth wonder of the world. Always timeless. You could have been anywhere in the world tonight, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that. I just broke his snare drum at just the wrong. That would have been so perfect. Had we just gone into the song right there? We're not that good. But we're not that cool.
It's like if 2000s high school drama had a sound, it would sound like this album, Tell Your Friends. But now, as a 24-year-old in the year 2021 who has changed a lot since I was young, I can only really appreciate this album in a nostalgic way, and I guess it just hasn't grown up with me in a lot of regards, and kinda hasn't held up musically for me personally as much as the next few albums on this list have. And with that, we're moving on.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I may please have your assistance. See, cause we're all young here, let's experiment. Y'all wanna experiment with me? If you possess a right hand, could you place it in the air as such? That goes for all of you. Yeah. Now, if you have a left hand to go with your right hand, could you place that in the air as well, like this? Now, here comes the... Now, don't get ahead of me now. Don't get ahead of me. Now, if you could place them together, ladies and gentlemen, in a syncopated fashion as such. Now look around. Now we're working. We're marching with long arms too high. The better to hold you down.
Hey yo, shut up. It's time to talk about some real shit. 2009's New Again. It's the most underrated Taking Back Sunday album. I would even go so far as to say it's one of the most underrated alternative rock records of the 2000s decade as a whole. And notice how I said alternative rock and not emo or pop punk. And yeah, that's right. I put New Again over Tell All Your Friends. I know, I'm wildin', I'm going crazy, but seriously, at this point in my life, New Again is an album which has aged gracefully with me through time. It is probably the Taking Back Sunday record that I go back and listen to the most and have, like, the most personal connection to as an adult as opposed to as a teenager. This is not just a nostalgia album for me. New Again, in my eyes, is like a true work of art and is all in all just a great, meaningful, timeless rock album. I'm saying it. I'm saying it. So let's get into the history of this album just a little bit, shall we? New Again is kind of like the Black Sheep TBS record, if you will. It was released during that weird period between Fred Mascherino's departure in 2007 and John and Sean's return to the band in 2010. The only album featuring Matt Fozzy on guitar and second vocal duties, and although critics really seem to like this album when it came out, in fact, Alternative Press's Scott Heisel infamously gave this album a 5 out of 5 star review in the magazine Alternative Press, and he actually called it the best Taking Back Sunday album yet at the time. However, obviously, it didn't sell as well as the previous albums. It didn't make, like, groundbreaking shockwaves through the alternative scene like Taking Back Sunday's albums did before. In fact, after the OG lineup came back to the band in 2010, the band expressed distaste for for this record. Adam actually went so far as to saying that New Again was, and this is a quote, a gigantic step backwards. And after that point, the band proceeded to basically never play any New Again songs live except for on a rare occasion. And there was a long period where they kind of just never really talked about this album and almost pretended that this album didn't exist, which is funny to me because I consider New Again to be the last truly great Taking Back Sunday record, and I like this one way better than anything that came after it. And I think at this point in time, a lot of fans agree with me about that too. You see, New Again has definitely gained somewhat of like a cult following in recent years, despite the band basically writing it off. People love New Again now. Some, not everybody, like I said, cult following, but it's caused this album to now be looked at as Taking Back Sunday's Pinkerton, if you will. Now, why do I love this album? I'm gonna tell y'all. So, the first thing about New Again, which I would like to shine light on, is that this is probably lyrically my favorite TBS record, and in my opinion, this might be the best Adam ever sounded on a record vocally, probably right behind Louder Now, in my opinion. While their lyrics on albums past were often plagued with vague misogyny and graphic depictions of gaslighting your ex, lyrics that, like I was saying, haven't aged all that gracefully, and Adam's voice used to be laced with more passionate intensity as opposed to actually singing the right notes on key. As opposed to that, I think he hits a real sweet spot as a frontman and as a singer and as a lyricist here on New Again. The lyrics on this album are just so powerful and personally meaningful to me. A couple of my favorite lyrics from this record include this one from the song Carpathia. I was a tower and you were an airplane. We happened before we knew what was happening. Or this one from the album's softer ballad, Where My Mouth Is. Until I couldn't breathe through my nose, and now I'm staring at the floor, where my second life just ended, where I lost not one but two friends. In Summerman, he says, if my lady only knew how high I am tonight, which is peak sassy Adam, and I love it. Summerman, goddamn. I don't know why that song isn't one of their most, popular songs. It should be top 10 on Spotify for them, if you ask me. I don't know why they don't play that one at every show. That is a banger. Aside from this being my favorite Taking Back Sunday album lyrically, this album just really sounds and feels nice and warm. The guitars are so warm and smooth, and there's a lot of really cool, well-crafted, jazzy guitar chords and seventh chords brought to the table by, guitarist Matt Fozzy. But the guitars also almost simultaneously manage to be really grungy and big and heavy and huge at the same time. The bass on this album is also fantastic. Matt Rubano is easily one of the most talented bassists to come out of any 2000s emo-leaning band, if you ask me, and he absolutely shines on this album. His bass somehow, sort of carries this whole album in a lot of ways, and them getting rid of the sheer talent of Matt Rubano was a huge shot in the foot for them following this record, if you ask me. And I guess at the end of the day, these songs, I think, are just great. They're heartfelt and have the tendency to really give me goosebumps and take me back to the sweet smell of summers past, while also being heavy, sleazy, rockin', and captivating tracks all the while. Unlike newer TBS albums, nothing about New Again feels confusing or out of place or unsure of itself, and this record just hits such a sweet spot for me. I completely disagree with Adam's statement back in 2010 where he said that this album was, quote, a gigantic step backwards for them. It might have been a step backwards in terms of commercial popularity, obviously, but to me, they didn't musically decline at all on this record. I don't know what the hell he was talking about. Their big steps backward came after the self-titled album, if you ask me. Now, there's a lot more that I could say about New Again, but I'll leave it at, this is one of my favorite Taking Back Sunday records. Such an underrated album, so personally meaningful to me. It seems to only get better with time. It's always kept me coming back, and there's nothing more I can really say about it, because it's really the sort of thing where I think that the music on New Again really speaks for itself and kind of speaks louder than any praise that I could really give it. Thank you, Matt Fozzy and Matt Rubano, for your fantastic contributions to this album musically, and I'm glad that this record has reached somewhat of a cult-like status amongst fans who now lovingly look back at this album as, sort of an underrated piece of greatness like I do. Anyways, time to move on to my next pick. Only 2 left, so which is it gonna be? Oh yeah, baby! 2006's Louder Now. You know it. It's a classic. Now, to set the stage, this album was, without a doubt, their overall commercial peak as a band. It was released on Warner Brothers Records, big major label. It achieved gold status with 500,000 sales just 2 months after it was released. Its lead single, Make Damn Sure, was a huge, radio hit all over MTV. The music video, it was big. This was some crazy, insane, real, genuine, palpable success that the band was experiencing during this time. They made it. They did it. They became a huge fucking rock band. That explosive little emo band, that was playing in little clubs in Long Island during, the early Tell Your Friends days. They were like for real big time now, like red carpet shit. The boys fucking did it on Louder Now. And the coolest thing I think about Louder Now is the band didn't compromise their sound or style or musical integrity at all in order to achieve this mainstream success. It's not a pop album. They didn't water themselves down. They didn't follow any sort of mainstream trends that were happening all the time. It really was the same loud, intense, emotional, melodramatic, and in-your-face Taking Back Sunday that we had known all along. The only real difference on this album is that, you could say it's definitely a tad more, kind of a lot more polished than their records before this one, and it doesn't really have the punk rock or emotional, post-hardcore elements that specifically Tell Your Friends had. Louder Now here is more of a straightforward rock album. But the way I see it, Taking Back Sunday's first 3 albums, this is the perfect trilogy of records, for a band to have released one after another. Each album, to me, showed the band's getting better and stronger every time, not to mention absolutely beating the success of each album which came before it, on their first 3 records. Taking Back Sunday just did not falter on the course of the first 3 albums, even with a huge lineup change in there after the first one. The band during this time was absolutely fucking unstoppable. Louder Now was also the first album by Taking Back Sunday that I had ever owned or listened to or gotten into, so there's definitely personal meaning there for me, but I really gotta say, when I was in high school, there was absolutely no way I would ever be caught dead ranking Louder Now over Tell Your Friends, or really anything over Tell Your Friends. Tell Your Friends was absolutely my favorite album at the time, but I almost think that I might actually specifically Louder Now more now than I did back in the day. Or at least it definitely appeals to me more now, with lyrics that generally, appeal to someone in their 20s a lot more than to someone in high school, like on Tell Your Friends. I also think that Fred Mascherino and Matt Rubano brought a lot of talent to the band, and to be frank, brought some real musical genius to this band that absolutely made Where You Want to Be and Louder Now shine and become, at the end of the day, in my opinion, just a little bit more timeless than any other TBS releases, except for New Again. I'm going to talk about Fred and Matt's influence on the band in the next album that I'm going to talk about. Wonder which one that could be. But they were and are both amazing musicians who really added so much to TBS, and were a huge reason why the first 3 Taking Back Sunday albums, or the second 2 that they were on, saw the band getting better with each one. Now, as far as this album musically, I could totally go into detail on why each individual song is awesome and amazing. It could be like a whole video in itself. I probably will do a video on the Louder Now era in the future. But for the sake of time and brevity, I will say that not only is What's It Feel Like to Be a Ghost, in my opinion, the best album opener TBS has ever had, it's probably one of my favorite openers on like any album that I've ever heard, honestly. That song has a swagger like no other. It's like the best big, dumb rock riff ever, you know what I mean? And a chorus that just absolutely blows the doors off the place. I cannot get over the chorus of this song like 15 years later. Also, Spin is probably my favorite song on the album, one of the best TBS tracks ever. Spin by itself is a true highlight of the 2000s emo pop punk movement as a whole. Totally essential, even though it wasn't like a big hit or anything. The only criticisms I have of this album are the fact that the two B-sides, the two outtakes from this album, the absolutely outstanding tracks Brooklyn and Sleep, were not included on the actual album. I think that a lot of fans would maybe agree with me that Miami and Up Against, you could say, are two of maybe the weaker tracks on Louder Now. I think it possibly would have been cool if Brooklyn was track 4 instead of Up Against, and maybe if Sleep was track 9 instead of Miami. Think about that. But even still, Up Against and Miami are still awesome, totally banging songs. Miami has a great guitar solo from Fred, and Up Against actually weirdly has one of my favorite bridges on the album. But yeah, man, Louder Now. What a mighty album. Aged super well. Not a lot of 2006 albums aged that well. I mean, this came out the same year that the Same Old Blood Rush with a New Touch by Cute Is What We Aim For came out. Did that album age very well? I mean, it's it's a fun album, but it doesn't hold a candle to Louder Now. I think Louder Now is better now than it was back then, and that's possibly the highest compliment that you could give to a 2000s like emo pop punk album of its kind. A lot of those albums, as great and classic and meaningful to us all fans, as they were, a lot of them were truly kind of stuck in the era from which they came, and Louder Now really doesn't feel too stuck in any era for me. But then again, my perspective might be a bit skewed, being somewhat of a connoisseur of emo pop punk music. I know that to someone who doesn't listen to this music as much as you or I do, all this shit kind of just sounds like Fall Out Boy. Like you're on vacation with your family and you put on Boys Like Girls and your mom is like, is this Fall Out Boy? And you're like, no, Mom. But that's a whole other can of beans. Anyway, with that, we're moving on to my number 1 pick, and what is, in my opinion, at this point in time, my all-time favorite Taking Back Sunday album. Can you guess what it is? You probably know what it is.
Come around about to come around. Can't you feel it rolling up your legs, picking up your shoulders? Come on. It's love, make it hard. I deserve when it's love. Make it hard. I deserve when it's.
Oh yes, baby. Yes, indeed. Where you want to fucking be. You're goddamn right. This, if you ask me, it's classic Taking Back Sunday, right in their sweet spot, man. You know what I mean? The way I see this record is like, you had the kind of raw, rough, over-the-top, emotional, more punk-leaning debut, Tell All Your Friends. At that point, the band are these like kind of ratty dudes with sort of Long Island tough guy energy, but they're also like super emo. It was that whole thing. It was more, coming out of basements, more punk rock. And, I was kind of talking about this perfect trilogy of albums, the first 3 TBS records. So let's also look at Louder Now for a second. Why isn't Louder Now my favorite over Where You Want to Be, if they apparently got better with each record? Well, it's a fantastic album, but it's kind of the opposite thing, where Louder Now was almost actually a little bit too far away from the raw, emotional punk energy of Tell Your Friends. Louder Now, you know, like I was just saying, was a more down the middle, straight up, capital R rock record, a lot more polished and mature. That's where You Want to Be comes in. You see, do you know where I'm getting with this? It bridges the gap. This one is my favorite, and I would say it's their best because it captured a perfect sweet spot between the over-the-top, emotional, youthful punk energy of Tell Your Friends and the polished, beefed-up, straightforward rock of Louder Now. It's right in the middle, like a perfect sweet spot of both. You know what I'm saying? Also, real quick, I just got to give it up to my man Fred Mascherino. This was the first Taking Back Sunday album with Fred on guitar and second vocals, and also the first album with Matt Rubano on bass. And I think probably the biggest reason why this record is so great is the talent and straight up musical mastery which Fred and Matt brought to the table, and how that paired so well with the classic TBS sound, which Adam, Mark, and Eddie were able to still hold down. I was actually fortunate and lucky enough to be able to do an interview with Fred for my series on this channel called Cozy Talk, which I did back in like January, which was absolutely amazing. We talked for like 3 hours all about this era of TBS. He is such a friendly, sweet, and down-to-earth guy, like for real. It's a great chat to listen to if you want to hear more about the Where You Want to Be era of the band and his whole time with them. So go check that out on my channel if you want. And also another quick plug, Fred actually has his own YouTube channel these days under the name The Color Fred. He posts all sorts of videos talking about the old days of TBS. There's a video where he catches up and talks to Matt Rubano. There's one where he talks to Eddie Reyes. It's really heartwarming for any TBS fan. And like I said, he's such a sweet guy. But anyways, back to Where You Want to Be. So Fred, insanely talented guitarist. You know, he went to like music school. He was teaching guitar lessons, I believe, you know, before joining TBS. He knows a lot about theory and like real musical smartness and all that sort of stuff. Before he joined Taking Back Sunday, he actually sang and played guitar in a really cool band called Breaking Pangea, who were kind of a lesser known sort of indie emo band who were on Equal Vision Records in the early 2000s.
And the worst part is having no idea. Yeah, the worst part is having no idea.
And him being in that band, they used to play with Taking Back Sunday. They kind of knew each other through the scene. This led to Fred joining Taking Back Sunday, and I think that his talent on the guitar, as well as the fact that he was kind of a, you know, singer-songwriter kind of guy, made TBS want him, because John Nolan kind of played the role of singer-songwriter, you know, background dual vocalist, background second vocalist before him. Adam had great vocals and incredible lyrical ideas. He was like the ultimate perfect frontman at the time. Mark had super hard-hitting, driving drum chops that were also very intricate when need be. Eddie kind of played the role of tastemaker and riff master. He had a lot of really cool riffs he brought to the table, which kind of made early Taking Back Sunday what it was. They needed a guy who could bring all of those elements together and turn it into something cohesive and presentable. And this is where a lot of bands really could choke and like totally pick the wrong guy. You know, this happens with a lot of bands who go through lineup changes. They get someone that's the wrong fit and they don't realize it until after the album like flops. You know, I think it was the complete opposite case in this scenario, because somehow Fred's vibe just matched perfectly, in my opinion, to Taking Back Sundays. He was like the perfect man for the job. I also totally got to give it up to Matt Rubano. I think Matt, like I was saying, is definitely one of the most talented bass players to come out of the whole 2000 2000s emo pop punk movement, if not the #1 most talented. Matt had kind of a different background. He didn't really come from the punk rock sort of world like the other members. He went to music school, same thing with Fred, and had like a jazz kind of background, I think. He played with his fingers, and if you listen to Where You Want to Be like in headphones and just focus in on the bass, the stuff he was doing was absolutely incredible and pretty much blew every other pop punk bass player at the time out of the water. Just such incredible talent that brought so much to this band. And them coming together, under crazy circumstances like the big lineup change that happened after Tell All Your Friends, they miraculously made such a great record right here on Where You Want to Be. It's definitely my favorite one. They definitely captured lightning in a bottle, and like I've said about some of their other albums, this is an album that aged incredibly well too. Also, I gotta say, one more thing before I wrap this video up. I was doing some Wikipedia research on all things Taking Back Sunday related in preparation for this video. You know how I do, pun intended. I found some interesting stuff about Where You Want to Be. So, this album came out on July 27th of 2004, right in the middle of summer, on Victory Records, which was kind of a more indie label at the time, no major label yet. However, this record debuted on the Billboard 200 chart at number 3, selling, get this, 163,000 copies in its first week, and remained on the chart for 19 weeks following that. It went gold in February of 2005, with sales reaching over 500,000 copies. Taking Back Sunday were actually the first band on Victory Records to have a gold album. Victory Records had never seen album sales quite this high before Taking Back Sunday came into the picture. In early 2006, album sales stood at 700,000 copies, so this is, just edging platinum at this point, I would assume. In 2005, J.J. Coxon, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, of publication The Aquarian Weekly, wrote that Where You Want to Be might, quote, perhaps go down in pop culture history as the record that broke the emo scene commercially. Also, I didn't even know this until recently, but Where You Want to Be actually outsold Louder Now first week. Louder Now sold 158,000 copies first week, while Where You Want to Be sold 164,000 copies. So there you go. The boys were ripping, they were killing it, and in my opinion, right here on Where You Want to Be, they made their best album, or they at least made my favorite album that they've ever done. So, thank you guys for hanging in there with me and listening to all my opinions on the classic rock band Taking Back Sunday. I hope to see you all soon in the future, in a future video, and thank you all for all the love and support as always. It's been your man Cozy. I'm checking out. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, wonderful evening, wonderful night, wonderful morning perhaps. Goodbye. See you next time.
Together, Fred actually joined the band about a year ago, but as far as like Taking Back Sunday's been a band for close to 4 years now, and we've been touring with Fred and the bands that Fred's been in for years. So
we've all been friends for even longer than Taking Back Sunday. So what band were you in? I was in this band called Breaking Pangea, and we tour with Taking Back Sunday ever since they started. So old friends.
So tell us about the album that's coming out.
Oh, it comes out on July 27th, and it's called Where You Want to Be, and it's we just locked ourselves in this rehearsal space in New York for months, and then we went in to record the record. We recorded with Lou Giordano, and he was just an amazing guy, and he let us he was real open to let us try stuff and things like that. And yeah, and we're extremely stoked. And it's real funny because most of us in the band, it's all we've been listening to. I don't know if that's pathetic or great, but like, but yeah, like you like wake up and somebody will have it on. Like I don't know. So we're just real excited for people that like be able to hold it. You know like.
So a lot of bands, some of the bands here are like past
Well, it's I think just so long as you're not compromising what you believe in and what you do, it doesn't matter if you're on a major or an indie or if you do it I don't know, or if you tour in a van or a bus, like saying you have to starve and stuff to have credibility is crap. Like it's so long as you're not questioning who you are, it doesn't matter, you know.
Is there a track that's going to go?
Yeah. Actually, we were our manager's here, and she told us earlier like they played one on K-Rock today, I think. It's called A Decade Under the Influence, and yeah, like we're pretty stoked like that, and to like just I mean even being like just a fan of music to like know that your stuff's on the radio is kind of like yeah, I don't know, it's just real cool.